Welcome. Thanks for attending the 13th Kentucky Prescribed Fire Council annual meeting. Of course, this is a virtual meeting this year. We're hopeful that by next year we'll be able to meet again in person. As far as who I am, my name is Josh Wilpoff. I work for Kentucky Nature Preserves and serve as the branch manager for our Natural Areas branch, where we oversee a statewide network of nature preserves, state natural areas. We also administer the Heritage Land Conservation Fund program, as well as the Wild Rivers program. I've been involved with Prescribed Fire since 2004 and currently serve as the fire program manager for Nature Preserves. I've served on the training committee for several years and as an at-large member for 3 years before stepping into the president's role here in 2020. If you're not familiar with the Fire Council, we consist of state and federal agencies, conservative or conservation organizations, universities, contractors, private individuals. We try to promote the safe and beneficial use of controlled burning as a land management tool in Kentucky. Membership's open to anyone interested in using fire as a land management tool in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We conduct the certified Kentucky Burn Boss training. We hold other trainings periodically throughout the year as needed or able to. We're a volunteer-based organization with a lot of support from our conservation groups in the state, fire agencies, that allow those of us serving in leadership roles to volunteer our time to work on the council. I encourage everyone, if you haven't, to visit our website, www.kyfire.org, for more information about who the board members are, what committees we have, and how to get involved. We've got a lot of good information to share with everybody today. We're going to hear from each of our committee chairs. We have an air quality, information education, partnership development, and a training committee. We'll hear from each of them. There's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes over the last few years on each of those committees to try and push prescribed fire forward in the state. And so I'm excited to share some of the things that those committees have been working on with you. We've also got a couple of guest speakers. Dexter Strother will be discussing the fire effects on soil, something that not many of us probably know a lot about or think about very often, but something that we need to consider. And then Aerin is joining us from Florida, and we'll be discussing some of the interesting things they have going on with the fire program there at the Everglades National Park. I will mention that periodically throughout the meeting here, we're going to be using the poll feature to kind of get some information from those of you in attendance. We just ask that when those pop up, if you'll just real quickly answer the questions there, and we'll try and share those answers back with the group as they come in. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Maddie Heredia, who's the chair of our Information Education Committee. She'll be our moderator today, and I'd like to give her a minute to introduce herself and let us know a little more about some of the technical aspects of our virtual meeting before we jump into our partner updates. So Maddie, if you want to take over for a minute and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Maddie. I work for Kentucky Nature Preserves. I'm a land manager and our outreach specialist. I'm also a chair on the Information and Education Committee for the Kentucky Prescribed Fire Council, and a new burn boss this year. Some things I want to go over before we get into the presentations. Just some general courtesy. We ask that everyone mutes themselves during presentations. The chat can be used for general questions or for questions that you have specifically for the speaker. We encourage you to ask that because we have some time allotted to asking the speaker those questions at the very end. So if you have questions during the presentation, please drop them in the chat. I will be monitoring that and pull those questions out to ask the speaker those at the very end of their presentation. You're also welcome to use the chat for general questions that you have about this meeting or the council. There are several of us who will be monitoring that and try to answer those questions for you as best as we can. And again, there's already some surveys popping up that Josh mentioned, but if you can just take those throughout the presentation as they pop up, that would be super helpful for us. And that is all I had on my end. And I think we're going to go ahead and jump into the fire season updates to start. And I'll let Josh take over and call on those individuals that have updates.
Thanks, Maddie. So if you're going to provide an update, when I call on you, just unmute your screen, turn your camera on, provide your update, please. So Chris Miner, you want to start for us?
Yeah, I'll kick us off here. So hello, I'm Chris Miner. I'm the fire manager for the Nature Conservancy in Kentucky and Tennessee. And I'll give you a quick update about this season's accomplishments. It was a little bit smaller in terms of staff capacity with us this year. When the hiring and stuff was going on back in late fall last year, there was a lot of unknowns around COVID, obviously, and some internal restrictions that just made it make sense to keep us a little bit small. So I ended up hiring 3 seasonal employees. They were staged in London. They're near the Daniel Boone National Forest. And I also had a contract again. I think this was the 3rd year in a row with Kentucky Division of Forestry. All in all, we had 12,559 acres of assists in Kentucky and Tennessee. 11,586 acres of assists in Kentucky, as well as 22,000 linear feet of fire line constructed. Of those acres, 11,000 of those acres were on Daniel Boone National Forest. The remaining was working with our partners, National Park Service, Mammoth Cave National Park. We burned there or assisted there on 209 acres, and then also at Big South Fork National Park, some smaller burns at 24 acres. We done a couple of sites of TNC's own lands, but that only equated to about 62 acres in Hart County and Garrett County. So in Tennessee, we helped with 973 acres. Yeah, no new burn bosses added this year. I do have 1 full-time permanent employee that is working on his engine boss trainee. Made some pretty significant progress on that this spring. No big trainings took place this past year, and I don't have any big trainings on the calendar right now. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got.
Thanks, Chris. Up next, we've got Jacob Stewart with Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Thank you, Josh. I'm Jacob Stewart. I'm the fire manager for Kentucky Fish and Wildlife. This year we had I'd say it was a record year for us with just over 8,000 acres burnt. And I had to say a lot of that goes to partnerships that have helped get us there. We've done a whole lot of burning this year with Nature Preserves Commission and Kentucky Division of Forestry. I don't know if Kentucky Division of Forestry will bring it up or not, but just in the southeast, they helped us do 612 acres. So, I mean, that goes a whole long way with pushing us forward, and we appreciate it. Again, I will notice that I got on the spot weather fire this year, and I noticed I think there was 9 different agencies burning one day. So it's really good stuff to see. And I think Josh will talk about the MOU here in a little bit about trying to make that even easier for all of us agencies to be able to burn together. That's something I definitely want to keep up and keep pushing forward with. As far as burn bosses with the agency, so far we've had 17 go through. 8 of them have now received their certified burn bosses. 2 of them received it this year. So we're doing pretty good moving forward, and the others that are not certified burn bosses are participating in getting their burns done. So they're pushing forward. As far as trainings go, our agency doesn't have anything planned or didn't put on any this year as far as that goes. Thank you, Josh.
Great. Thanks, Jake. It's awesome to hear. Up next, we've got Leaf Meadows with the U.S. Forest Service.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Leaf Meadows, FMO in the London Ranger District. For accomplishments this year, we burned 19,455 acres on the forest. And of course, if we count the, I think it's roughly 700 acres that did through KDF on the neighboring lands, puts us a little bit over 20,000, which is, if it's not a record, it's really close. I actually believe that's the most we've been able to do in a year. Didn't have any stand downs, so didn't get shut down. Had a lot of good weather, enough rain, a lot of good opportunities. I do want to echo what Jacob says is really cool. When we're geeking out looking at the weather, and you get to do one spot in the area, and then you'll see 5 or 10 neighboring ones and a bunch of different agencies. It's really, really, really great. Awesome to see. Look back to 10 years ago, it did not look that way. And kudos to all the agencies. We burned, that was in 35 burns. Those are broken into some smaller ignition units, like 300 to 500 acres. The Forest Fire Organization, and I can't remember if I reported this last year or not, but this is the first time in maybe a decade that we're actually almost fully staffed. And of course, as soon as I say that, we just had several people take details in the last day or two. So we're trimming back down, but we're in as good shape as we've been in a while. And of course, thanks for the great help with TNC, those resources. Had many training opportunities were achieved from folks, detailers from all over the country, and our own folks. So really got to provide a lot of opportunities there. We have about 4 to 6 RXB2 trainees on the forest, and I think we're sitting at about 15 qualified, which again is as good as we've been in a long time. I've been talking with, started talking to Chris Scott a little bit, and Michael, that we're going to try to do some NEPA on lands adjacent to the private lands KDF is burning, NEPA on Forest Service lands, and maybe help their burns become more efficient and add them acres and get our get them to do our workforce, get them to treat our lands, and that should really increase efficiency. The normal amounts of trainings with the Forest Service have been going on. Of course, most of that's went virtual. Don't really have anything out of the normal plan this coming year. End of report.
Great, thanks, Lee. Yeah, I think the amount of partnership and collaboration this year between all the partners is drastically increasing. It's great to see, and I think that's the theme that we'll hear from all the partners. I will take this moment to mention, if there's anybody on here that would like to provide an update, and I don't have you on the list, please shoot a shout out to me real quick or something, and we'll get you on here before we finish with the updates. Next, we're gonna have Trey from Berea College give us an update on what they've had going.
Hey guys, how's it going? We just had a small burn this year at Berea, but I was happy because it was the first burn that I was able to do as a certified burn boss. I finished my training last year, and this year is interesting because we started the first in a series of 6 burns that we're doing in conjunction with faculty at the University of Louisville, and they're going to be studying the effects of prescribed fire on everything from local climate, entomology, biology, a lot of different stuff around here. So let me show you a couple of facts real quick. Everything went pretty smooth. Oh, that's not gonna work out right. But we only burned 20 acres, but I just wanted to give thanks to Matt Haywood and Strider Deaver and Sarah Crunk and everybody at Tom Edwards at Fish and Wildlife that helped us get this burn done. So it's just good for us to get fire on the ground. So.
Awesome. Yeah, great to see you guys getting more fire on the ground there, Trey.
Yep.
No, it wasn't long ago you all didn't have a fire program, so
yeah. So we're just trying to keep fire on the ground every year, keep the momentum moving forward.
Great. Next up, we have Michael Fraley from Division of Forestry.
Hey everybody, yeah, it's a pretty busy season for us for KDF here, so just a quick update from us for the 2021 spring burn season. So total this spring, we burned over 2,000 acres. Solo wise, we did 647 acres on different partners of Office of Kentucky Nature Reserves, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Kentucky Fish and Wildlife Resources, some private property, and also did one on our state forest. Assisted, we did 13,058 acres, again, on a lot of those different other partners. And then we also did a T&C sub-award that Chris Meyer talked about. And in that award, we assisted the U.S. Forest Service on a little over 8,000 acres. Again, partners, can't rely good enough on all these partners that we'd be able to do all this stuff between Chris at T&C, Josh and his people at Office of Kentucky Nature Reserve, Leaf and EJ and all them on the U.S. Forest Service side of things. On the U.S. Fish side of things, can't rely enough on Brent to help us on a lot of stuff. On the State Fish and Wildlife side, working with Jacob, and then Mike Strunk down there in the southeast corner of the state of getting a lot of burns down there. And then again, with Trent just talking about here at Berea College, it was a great partnership working with a college of doing some burns. As of KDF, the Certified Burn Boss, we've had 19 people go through the program. I got 13 people on a wait list right now because of COVID restrictions. We weren't able to put those people through the course back in February. So hopefully maybe here sometime this summer, we'll get those 13 people in. We have a total of 8 certified burn bosses that have gone through the program and have become certified out of the apprentice program. And we also have 1 RXB2 that we have on staff. And with that, that's end of my report. Josh.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. It's pretty awesome to see that stuff come up from Division of Forestry. You guys keep getting a lot more done and a lot more involved in prescribed fire. It's great to see. Appreciate that. So Rick was not going to be able to, from Bernheim, was not going to be able to be with us today, but he did send me an update for Bernheim. They had a small season this year, only burned about 1.5 acres on a couple of small glades that were important though. He did mention that they plan on doing a lot more growing season burns this year and have plans to burn a total of 37 acres there. They also trained 2 new staff members to be part of the burn crew this year. So adding some experience to the crew and then branching out to do those growing season burns. That's great to hear. Guess I'll move into nature reserves fire update. We had a record year this year also, and I can't really mention all the partners, but I do want to specifically mention, and I know it's been mentioned before, but KDFWR and KDF. I feel like, at least in my experience, in my history in Kentucky, that this year 3 state agencies really worked together a lot better. I know there were several instances where nature preserves has a smaller crew of about 7. Really is all our fire crew is for the most part, but there were several instances where we were able to split crews and rely on our partners and help them out. They helped us out, and that's really gone a long way. And I think that momentum is just going to continue to move forward. And the hope is, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that it's not just the state agencies doing that, but we're working with the nonprofits and private sector and our federal partners to really share those resources and move stuff forward. So this year, nature reserves, we burned 478 acres on sites that we own, 619 acres on heritage land sites. We've tried the last few years to provide some additional assistance to some of our local governments and nonprofits that own land through the heritage land program. We've also burned 137 acres just on partner sites. That brought our total to about 931 acres on a total of 25 units. Which doubles our record that we set in 2018. So I'm really excited that we're getting a lot of good fire on the ground. We trained 3 new crew members this year. We had 1 crew member, Maddie, who you all met earlier. She actually received her certification this year, so that brings on another burn boss. 3 years ago, we had a fire crew that was relatively they pretty much new to prescribed fire. not a lot of experience and stuff, but over the last 3 years with what we've been able to do, they've got a lot of experience, and it was really nice. This was the first year in the last few years that the crew was able to go out without me or our director being on site. And Heidi Ryder has really stepped up and is leading the crews a lot more now. So Nature Preserve just plans on to do more as we move forward in the future. We also help mentor not just KMP apprentice burn bosses, but also Fish and Wildlife and Division of Forestry, help get some of those people some experience. We since our last meeting last fall, we completed 5 burns in the fall time there, which was more than we've ever done before, and we're going to continue that moving forward here. So so it's been a really good year. We had good weather. We're getting a lot more experience on our crew, and then our partnerships are really coming together to make a lot of good things happen. So it's been an exciting year, and looking forward to even more coming out next year. So with that, I think we wrap up the updates. A lot of good stuff going on in the state from the partners there. Fire Council's helping facilitate a lot of that, and so that's really good to see. But Maddie, I'll turn it back over to you so we can move into our presentations.
Thanks, Josh. We are a little bit ahead schedule, which is great. But I'm going to go ahead and introduce the Air Quality Committee updates. They're going to give a presentation of the smoke management plan, and it's also going to include an open discussion. So this is going to be presented by Kesley Baker, who's the current chair of the Air Quality Committee, as well as Jennifer Miller, who's the former chair and with Division of Air Quality. So if you all want to go ahead and get that started.
Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. So we are here today to talk a little bit about our voluntary smoke management plan. We have submitted the plan to the board for their comments, and we are going to be submitting it to all of you to hopefully get your comments. So we thought we'd just go over the voluntary smoke management plan and what you might see in that plan. So a little background information. States are required to operate an air monitoring network. That data is compared to national ambient air quality standards to determine if an area is meeting those standards. Now, of course, smoke from prescribed fires can impact those monitors, causing them to violate a NAAQS. We call this being a non-attainment. When it comes to prescribed fire, we tend to be most worried about ozone and PM 2.5 impacts. So what does it mean when we're in non-attainment? It means that at that point, there has been an impact on public health because the NAAQS are public health-based standards. It also means that there is very likely going to be impacts on that area's economic development, as well as there could be a loss of federal funding. So a violation of the NAAQS is bad, to say the least. And the EPA luckily does allow certain data to be excluded from comparisons against the national ambient air quality standards if the state air agency can prove that it was affected by what we call an exceptional event. Exceptional events include prescribed fire, but there are a lot of stipulations that you have to meet. The two most prominent are that the state must either certify to the EPA that it is implementing a certified smoke management program, or it must demonstrate that the burn manager employed basic smoke management practices. Now, a certified smoke management program is not something the state of Kentucky can currently support because it includes things like a permitting program that includes considerations of air quality. So you have to have an authorization to burn. It includes components of public education, awareness, and outreach. It has stipulations on what burn plan components must be in every single burn plan in the state. And those components include considerations of smoke management. And it also includes a method of program evaluation to make sure that that smoke management program is actually effective. So we can't support that here in the state now. So what we came up with was a voluntary smoke management plan. So instead of it being certified, this relies on the use of basic smoke management practices. So it promotes the use of those practices, hopefully reducing the likeliness that smoke from prescribed fire will cause a violation of the NAAQS. And it has a lot of advantages. It serves as a template for testing a smoke management program should a certified, fully implemented program be needed in the future. It encourages use of the fire portal. And what that means is it increases the Division for Air Quality's ability to correlate a particular fire with actual monitor impacts if we see it, which means we might actually be able to get an exceptional event designation. It provides practitioners with flexible recommendations as opposed to strict regulatory requirements. It provides air quality staff with guidance on how to get an exceptional event demonstration completed. And it caters to a variety of professional and educational backgrounds. And most importantly, it does not require the programmatic support or funding necessary to implement a certified smoke management program. So the Kentucky Voluntary Smoke Management Plan, it's a comprehensive document. We worked very hard to combine information from multiple sources. It's educational. It is meant to be a public resource, and it attempts to use plain language to describe complicated things like the exceptional events rule. It's a PR document. It promotes the benefits of prescribed fire while still promoting the protection of public health. It provides additional resources and tools for everyone to use if they find themselves in need. It can be applied to multiple land management scenarios. So it might be usable by someone burning crop stubble as well as somebody burning for ecological goals. And it expands on the list of 6 generalized basic smoke management practices that were presented in the exceptional events rule. So what are these basic smoke management practices? They are actually, what the EPA did is when they published the revised exceptional events rule in 2016, they pulled verbatim a table from the NRCS from their basic smoke management practices document from 2011. And so if you look at this table, the basic smoke management practices are very generalized. There's not a lot of information there, and they seem very easy to meet. And ultimately they probably are, but the exceptional events rule and the associated guidance that they have put out afterwards makes getting an exceptional event demonstration pretty tough. So it is very important that people follow the basic smoke management practices presented. So this is what our Kentucky basic smoke management practices list looks like. It is nearly identical to the one printed in the exceptional events rule. However, what we have done is we have added potential elements that you might use to help you meet each one of those practices. And again, we took each of those elements from multiple sources to help give you plenty of options. Now, basic smoke management practices are not mandatory, and they are not all-inclusive, and they are not required for every single prescribed fire. These are flexible recommendations. So we'll go through them really quickly. BSMP1 is evaluation of smoke dispersion conditions. That includes things like identifying your fuel type and loading, determining your MET criteria, looking at smoke impacts. Number 2 is monitoring effects on air quality. So that includes checking air quality forecasts and conditions, tracking smoke transport. Number 3 is communication and public notification. That includes communication with government entities, emergency personnel, and the general public. Number 4 is consideration of other emission reduction techniques. That includes reducing the burn area, fuel load, changing your fuel, and increasing your combustion efficiency. And there's coordination of area burning, sharing the air shed. That's number 5. And that's the one that I don't think that we do very well currently right now, and I hope we get better at it. It's going to include formalized procedures between agencies on how you coordinate multiple burns in an area to manage impacts that could occur if multiple smoke plumes were to combine. It also includes informal voluntary actions among all of you. It also includes perhaps use of the Kentucky Prescribed Fire Portal. Number 6 is documentation, journaling. That includes your burn plan. It includes a post-burn report if you do it. And it includes record keeping and archival. The Kentucky VSMP generally has this format. This is a basic outline of the document. It's an introduction, basically tells you everything that we're going over here today, why we need a voluntary smoke management plan. It includes overviews of prescribed fire, a brief description of regulation of prescribed fire in the state, an overview of ambient air quality, an understanding of the exceptional events rule overview, an overview of BSMPs with individual chapters dedicated to each of the 6 BSMPs. It includes appendices, which give you additional tools such as a pictorial field model. It contains the original NRCS document. And it also includes a checklist that we created that you might use when working on your burn plan or your post-burn report to see where each of these elements were accounted for or where that information is located. And I am going to change this over to Kesley, who's going to finish us up.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yeah,
Maybe.
we can, Kesley.
Okay. All right. First of all, thank you so much, Jennifer, for providing your expertise and assisting KDF and the Prescribed Fire Council on this project. We really appreciate all that you have done for us with this. But just to sum up, again, we ask everyone to review the document and provide as much feedback as possible. This is a document made for practitioners, so we want to make sure that it is usable across agencies and educational backgrounds, things like that. EPA Region 4 and the Prescribed Fire Council have already been provided with a copy, and the Fire Council will be providing a copy to all of the other members through email, so be sure to look for that. The deadline to submit any questions or comments is July 31st in order for it to be considered in the final version. And we hope to have the final document completed by September. Comments can be provided to your fire program leader, or you can send it directly to me. And my email address is right down there at the bottom. Let's see. Okay, Jennifer. Okay, so what we need, like I said, This is made for practitioners, so we really want to make sure that everything is easily understood and usable. We want this as a usable document, not just something that, you know, sits on a shelf somewhere. So some of the things that you should be thinking about as you're reviewing it, is this document usable for staff of multiple backgrounds, education levels, and across agencies? Is what we have for the BSMPs reasonable to you? Is it helpful? Also, is it easily integrated into your current fire programs? So that's a big thing. And another thing is, are the appendices useful? I know we have an example burn plan and a fuel model appendices. So just kind of look over that and see if the burn plan is appropriate. I know there's a couple different ones floating around. Different agencies use different burn plans. And if the fuel model is appropriate for the document, since it's a smoke document, we weren't sure whether we should have the fuel model added in there or not. And is the checklist helpful? I feel like it is, but just be sure to look through it. And any items in red text need additional feedback. Okay, so does anyone have any questions or comments as of right now?
Hey, Kesley, this is Josh. I'll make a comment real quick. I'll just say that first, thank you all for your hard work on this. I know Jennifer's been working on this for a few years, and Kesley's been helping out a lot here the last year or so to get this document in the format that it is now, where it's ready to be reviewed by the membership and the board. As I said, we want this to be a usable document that helps us moving forward. We all probably hear about smoke management concerns from you know, some of the other states that have dealt with this more than us. And I think it's in our best interest to be proactive in adopting a voluntary smoke management plan, you know, to kind of head that off and make sure that we set ourselves up so that we can continue to increase our acres and the amount of prescribed fire use on the land. So with that being said, you know, to the fire program leaders and the board members, you know, we definitely need to take a hard look at this, but to the practitioners and those of you that are out applying fire on the ground, you know, this document needs to work for you all, because the hope is that the Fire Council and all its partners will adopt this, and that will become the new standard for our smoke management practices. So I encourage you all to look at this, review it, make sure that it will work and it doesn't handicap or handcuff you in your ability to apply fire in the way that you or your agency need to apply it. So, but like as they said, this is an open discussion. So if there's questions or anything like that right now, feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Also have the chat box open if anyone wants to just type in a question or comment.
Kesley, this is Jacob Stewart. I was just wondering, with our fire portal we have now, have you all been able to actually look when you all have gotten your monitoring stations hit with a violation, that be able to see if you could tell if it was prescribed fire or not, or even wildfire for that matter?
So at the Division for Air Quality, we actually don't believe we've had any hits from prescribed fire, because we believe everyone is self-regulating, which is why we're able to do a voluntary smoke management plan. We don't need a regulation right now. The idea is if we did see a hit and everybody is using the prescribed fire, go in, take a look, and see what was going on in that day, and perhaps correlate, you know, concentrations on the monitor with a particular prescribed fire.
Gotcha. I was just wondering if, just seeing if how the portal, if y'all have used it yet or not. That's good that we we haven't had to.
Yeah, and I have gone in a few times just to look around. I think the big thing with the fire portal is people need to use it on a regular basis. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess now's a good time to remind everyone if you haven't put your fires in for the 2021 season at the fire portal, please do that. If you don't know how to access that, feel free to reach out to me or one of the other board members or talk to your fire program leader.
Josh, Brian Gray had a question on the chat there.
How many air quality monitoring sites are there in Kentucky?
Well, we currently have 23 sites in the state air monitoring network. That includes sites operated by Louisville Metro and Jefferson County, as well as Mammoth Cave National Park. However, there are additional sites operated by the EPA, and there could be sites that we don't know about. EPA is sneaky sometimes. So, I mean, you should, at the very least, check out our annual network monitoring plan. We publish it each year by July 1st. And that tells you at least where our permanent monitor locations are for that year. The good news is that the monitoring network doesn't change much. So once you know where an air monitoring station is, it's usually there for a while.
Jennifer, this might be a good time to mention, we had talked previously about that it's worthwhile for practitioners to notify the local offices when they are completing burns in areas. I know Nature Preserves has actually written that into our burn plan as one of our morning of notifications. Is that something that we want to encourage all the membership to do?
That is correct. And that is actually in the voluntary smoke management plan, is that we do ask that you notify your local Kentucky Division for Air Quality regional office. Just so that if we do see impacts, we know what's going on. It also helps because sometimes we get complaints on smoke and we don't know where they're coming from. So it is helpful to notify your regional office. And all of that information is in the plan. It includes the contact information and also contact information for forestry.
That link has been posted in the chat as well. Anyone else? Well,
I will just say, if anybody as they're reading, I mean, official comments need to go to Kesley, but if you just want to talk through something, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. I love talking about air quality. Just if something comes up while you're reading, a discussion anytime, I'm around. So there's nothing else.
Jennifer, will you put your contact information in the chat so people can reach you if they read that and have a question later?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that presentation. Like Josh said, this has been something that's been in the work for years, and we appreciate all your hard work on this and getting it to a point where it can be reviewed. So thank you all for that. And with that, we are going to go into a short break. I believe we have a little extra time. So we will come back at 11:15. Everyone, we are back. And Cody made a very good point in the comments. When we go on these breaks and when we break for lunch, the meeting is still going, and you guys are welcome to turn off or turn on your mics and cameras and have discussions just like we would in an in-person meeting. I know it's a little harder. But with that, I want to go ahead and introduce our first presentation, or our second presentation of the day, by Dexter Strother. Can you just give me a little shout out, Dexter, that you are here and back from break?
I am here.
Awesome. His presentation is fire effects on soil and soil fauna and black carbon. Works with the USDA. He started fighting fires in the Ocala National Forest in Florida in 2007. Spent 2 weeks, the next 2 years in Tonto National Forest in Mesa, Arizona. He then accepted a position as a SCEP student trainee in the Francis Marion and Sumter National Forest in 2010 and 2011. He graduated from Alabama A&M University in 2012 with a degree in forestry and was offered an opportunity through the Southern Research Station to pursue a graduate degree at the University of Georgia, where he graduated in May 2020 with a PhD in ecology. He is originally from Chicago, but has traveled all around the South because of firefighting and ecology work. He currently works with SRS in Athens, Georgia as a research ecologist. So if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen, we are ready whenever you are.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me fine. As Maddie said, my name is Dexter Strother. I'm here to talk to y'all about fire effects on soils, soil fauna, and black carbon. So in this presentation, I would like to discuss certain soil definitions, horizons, properties, processes, these fire effects, including black carbon, monitoring techniques, and two of my chapters from my dissertation instead of all 3 experiments because of time restraints. So what is soil? Soil is a natural body composed of 5 different parts: mineral and organic matter, gas, which is mainly air, water, as well as soil fauna. Soil can be processed or looked at or viewed in different horizons or layers due to the addition, loss, and transformation of energy and matter through this material, as well as its beneficial effects of supporting plant life, which gives us, of course, oxygen and food. So how is soil formed? Soil is formed through a function of what we consider as soil ecologists, CLORT, which stands for climate, organisms, relief, paramaterial, and time. And recently, they've added an H at the end of CLORT, which includes humans, because we have the ability to change and affect soils, whether that's from agriculture or fire or whatever implementation we put on the land, so land use. What is the function of soils within ecosystems? Soils provide a medium for plant growth and supplies nutrients, regulates hydraulic systems, so it acts as a buffer, recycle nutrients, it's a habitat for living organisms. And how does fire affect these functions? So fire, even if it doesn't directly affect every terrestrial ecosystem or every part of the world, it has indirect effect too, whether that's through deposition of black carbon outside of that ecosystem, or smoke or soot, which we already spoke of, but in general, majority of the world experience some impact of fire. So what about soils? Soils have direct effects, including removing detritus, which is decaying material, heating vegetation or death, so removing certain plant species and allowing new other species to come in, indirectly through plant community change, maintaining, shifting the successional state of the ecosystem, whether that's forward or backwards, depending on the ecosystem. And it has long-term consequences, especially in terms of carbon dynamics. So in general, especially throughout the Southeast, we look at soil as a fertilizer because it breaks down immobilized material like that's, so nutrients that's locked into like a branch, a twig, a pine cone, and allows it to be available for growing in new plants post-burn. And it causes, like, even when you get scorched, you get new deposition of leaves or litter from trees dropping down into the soil, which cause a fresh cycling of nutrients. Also, we know, especially in temperate ecosystems, frequent fire tend to lead to higher biodiversity. So in terms of soil horizons, the organic horizon or the O layer can be distinguished into three different terms. Right here, you see OI, OE, and OA, and that just refers to the level of decomposition or decay of the material. Others have used, especially in the European world, use L, F, and H, which just means litter, fulvic, and human material. In the fire world, we tend to just say litter and duff, which is just decaying material. And in the middle horizons, we have the A, the B, the C, and the R. So in terms of soil property, we have physical, chemical, and biological. Under physical, we have the texture and the structure, its porosity, which leads to the effect of water erosion. Chemically, we have pH, cation exchange capacity, base saturation, and biologically, we look at soil fauna and microbes. So fire effects on soil properties depend on the sensitivity change. In general, we split it up into three levels of sensitivity. That's moderately sensitive, insensitive, and very sensitive. So what is insensitive? So anything that has these temperature thresholds above the 500 degrees Celsius mark, so magnesium, calcium, clay, all of these have high temperature. So that means it's very unlikely in general, especially in prescribed fire, that you will alter these materials. These moderately sensitive, this is around the range that the soil doesn't experience itself, but fires are generally in, such as sulfur, soil structure, and wettability. That's what you generally affect on average in the fire. These are the most sensitive things in the fire: bacteria, fungi, plant roots, seeds, and small mammals, because these things directly can die or cease to exist based on the fire that we put out or our implementation of that fire. In terms of ecosystems, we can see that slash and shrublands have the higher temperature threshold, but in general, forests and grasslands tend to be more buffered, more controlled, not as intense in terms of the fire that we put or the fire effects on those soils. That's what this graph is showing here. Soil processes in terms of decomposition. So we know fire removes organic matter from the material because that's literally what you're physically burning. But there's a debate in the soil world because although you initially remove this organic material, we know, especially in the South, you can go out there in 3 to 5 days and see the new plant life is growing back, and we get that what we call reburn potential or new leaf litter dropping down from the trees. So although fire initially removes some organic matter, we know that it then recycles back, and that then recycles the nutrients as well, which includes nitrogen and phosphorus. So microbes are extremely important, especially because we know most of the temperate ecosystems are nitrogen limited. So microbes help because they fix nitrogen, they add nitrogen to these ecosystems, which the plants need to grow and survive and live, so they coexist. Microbes also can do ammonification, which is taking the organic matter and switching from CO2 into NH4, which is nitrate. They can do nitrification, which takes ammonia and switch it to nitrate, and they can denitrify. They can actually remove nitrogen from other materials and release it as N2 gas into the atmosphere. So how does fire affect soils physically? So water, which is a major factor, tends to be the main topic, and it's because right post-burn, fire tends to have an erosion effect, or it causes a lot of runoff, slickness, a lot of decay. The soil also has water holding capacity, which decreases soil organic matter because of its high specific heat. It causes the reduction of the energy of the fire, which makes the soil safer to burn. Biologically, when you remove organic matter, there's microorganisms, there's things, soil fauna that live in that material. Sometimes you can decrease their abundance, but overall, they recover, they bounce back, because majority of them, especially larger fauna, which just go down into the soil. The smaller microorganisms are a little more immobile, but they're so abundant that you don't tend to kill them all, and they can reproduce and come back quickly. Mycorrhizae are particularly susceptible to burning because they assist plants with nutrient acquisition, and they like to live in the higher levels of the soil, so the areas that you pretty much walk on while you're doing your prescribed burn. However, fires can be beneficial to some soil-dwelling taxa because the soil fauna likes new and fresh nutrients and growth, and fire can cause that new deposition. So generally, fire results in a flux of carbon, nitrogen gases. Like, okay, you can see the smoke giving off while you're burning. Also cation exchange. And it shifts the nutrient dynamics of the soil to a more carbon-rich soil, which means it takes more energy for microbes in order to break it down. This also depends on the fire intensity. So how do we monitor fire effects? So when it comes to the O horizon, the organic material, some people use Duff pins, which is just a measurement of the Duff layer based on like a centimeter. It's almost like a ruler. Or you can do direct measurements pre and post fire. So you go out there, you take a soil core, you see how much Duff is there, and then post fire, you come in and do the same thing. We also have burn severity class, which is an indirect measurement for soil heating. And it's a post fire pretty much index of how the fire affected the soils. And those categories are low, moderate, and high. So now I want to shift gears and talk directly about some of my research and part of the reason why I want to talk today. Because when I came to the Tennessee Kentucky Wildland Fire Academy, I was speaking about black carbon, which is what I studied. And in general, before I get into what I did for my dissertation, the reason that I became interested in studying black carbon was that everybody's talking about these ecosystems or fire in general as a source of global warming or climate change negatively. But if it was so bad, I was like, why were we continuously doing this? But what we've seen, at least in the science world, is that we don't account for all carbon in our carbon recycling. So it's called the missing link in the literature. And I think a large component of this missing link is black carbon. So what is black carbon? Black carbon is a product of incomplete combustion. Most people, especially firefighters, when you think of black carbon, you think of either, I don't know if y'all can see my mouse, but we think of charcoal, which you see like bark flakes or right around a tree, or smoke, which in the atmospheric science world, they consider soot. But recently, black carbon has been described as a continuum ranging from slightly charred plant material to soot and graphitic BC. As you see along the continuum, you get a lot of different changes, whether that's temperature, low to high, size. So the soot, the smoke stuff is a little bit more smaller than the larger charcoal pieces or the branches or bark flakes that's still on the ground. You get different changes in reactivity, which means their ability to stay within the soil and transport distance as well. So we know the smaller stuff can move farther off. So that's similar to the talk we heard earlier. She's talking about monitoring the smoke effects. We know that the soot travels way farther than charcoal, which tends to stay in situ or in that general locale. So in the black carbon world, majority of the research has focused on the atmosphere. So you see, if you look at these pools and fluxes, you got a lot of accounts and percentages on the right side. But my research focused on this left side, even though it's known that the majority of black carbon produced is produced in the soil. But if you look at how much you retain, we still don't know. So early on, we studied the atmospheric side. Now we're starting to finally shift gears and look at the soil side, even though the soil side is about 80% as opposed to the 20% that's produced in the atmosphere, as well as on average, black carbon only lasts 7 days in the atmosphere, where it can last for thousands of years in the soil. So what made me do this type of research? So little research focused on the soil component, which is what I was just getting at. This information can increase the accuracy of the black carbon pools and fluxes, as well as carbon pools and fluxes globally, and impact the global climate change scenarios. So I wanted to kind of close the gap, fill in some of the missing links or missing information on black carbon and contribute to the benefits of fire overall. So the overall goal of my dissertation, I had 3 different chapters. I wanted to look at fuel, moisture, and fire type effects on black carbon production, for fuel loading and fire frequency effects, because we have a long-term fire study on the Osceola National Forest in Florida, but I'm not going to talk about that today. And then I want to examine the carbon mineralization rates of soil with pine needles and black carbon mixed together. So this is how I went about the first experiment. So we know many factors influence black carbon production: fuel type, fuel moisture, fuel loading, weather conditions, fire intensity, the locale, the day. However, few studies have actually took out each individual variable and tried to quantify or at least see its impacts. So we know recently forested ecosystems have received increased attention for their ability to sequester CO2, because that's what everybody's talking about now, whether it's carbon credits, whether it's climate change, that's the future. So, but again, like I said, the research showed that burning is a source, so it's causing more CO2 to be released. But they also say that these systems are carbon neutral or possibly a sink, which I think they're more of a sink than carbon neutral. Here's a graph of the acres burned in 2018 for wildfires and prescribed fire. So I set out in this experiment to determine what's the rate of black carbon production, to test a new PAN methodology to deploy in the field to quantify black carbon from individual fire and measure the impacts of fuel moisture and fire type on black carbon. We know, especially people in this room, about head fire and backfires, so I'll just skip over that. But my overall experimental design was a full factorial design, which was a cross combination of fuel moisture and fire type. What I did was I took these fuel beds at different fuel moistures. I had a low moisture, which was between 5 and 7%, medium, which was between 11 and 13%, and a high fuel moisture, 17 and 19%. And I burned each one of the fuel beds. And I burned 3 of them with head fire, the other 3 with a backing fire across the different fuel moisture levels. Below the fuel bed, I had pans, which you can see in this picture, that had some carbon-free glass bead, which acts like sand, essentially. And this glass bead, I put in the muffle furnace for 450 degrees for 8 hours to make sure that there was no other carbon entities in it. So that was to make sure that any carbon found in this glass bead had to come from the pine needles that I'm burning in this experiment. I used fans to dictate the head fire and backing fire. Also above each fire, I had a FLIR camera, which is an infrared camera that measures at each pixel at 1 second. And I can do temperature calculations between 300 and 1500 degrees Celsius. Post-fire, I removed those pans and then took them back to the lab in order to process them for black carbon. And because I'm interested in the extremely recalcitrant form of black carbon, because I told you black carbon is a continuum from partially charred all the way to soot and graphite. I then took that material that was in those pans post-burn and boiled it in nitric acid for 24 hours. So I want the extremely recalcitrant form, which means I actually am underestimating the black carbon that's produced. But I know that this is the most resilient, gonna last the longest, strongest form of the BC. So here's a table summarizing my results. So what I found was that in terms of fire energy release, which I got from the infrared camera, which makes sense, the low fuel moisture released the most energy, meaning it had the highest intensity. It burned the hottest, essentially. Then when I look at fire duration, I seen that the high fuel moisture was the slowest, but it was not a significant difference between time of burn. When we look at firing type, it did not affect overall fire energy release, but it did affect the duration, obviously, because we know the head fire moved across each burn faster than backing fire did. So what did I get from this experiment? So the fuel moisture effect on fire energy release and firing type duration was statistically significant. Fuel moisture and firing type did not have a significant effect on black carbon production, but I'm going to explain why this happened in a little bit. Of course, this technique actually worked. That's how I got the results. So one of the reasons that I think I did not find a difference in black carbon production based on fuel moisture and firing type is in these burns, which is my initial burns, just my dissertation, and I'm currently working on the next phase. I only had pine needles. So we know in the real world or in the ecosystem or in your forest, you're gonna have more than just pine needles. You're gonna have hardwood litter, you're gonna have twigs, you're gonna have cone. So you're gonna have things that have a higher lignin content or a more woody component. And I think that would contribute to more black carbon being produced, which would then bear out a significant difference, even though I did not find one in this study. What this does show me that is that pine needles alone do not, just based on fuel moisture, affect BC production enough. So what I'm gonna do now is go into the field and repeat the burns without manipulating fuel moisture and add in pine cones and twigs and a more woody component and see if I then can distinguish difference in BC. So in my other chapter, I looked at black carbon inside of these mason jars because I wanted a more controlled environment. And I want to look at how did black carbon, pine needles, microorganisms interact in terms of CO2 release. So I didn't talk about the other study. So in the previous experiment, I talked about how I produced black carbon and what was done. And in this experiment, I wanted to see, did fresh organic matter or black carbon have an effect on pine needles? So one thing we need to talk about is priming. Priming is essentially the impact of fresh substrate on the existing soil organic matter. So that means if you have something that's less labile, whether that's sugar or pine needles, as opposed to a more recalcitrant thing like black carbon or humic materials or photic materials, what is the impact of their interaction? Does it cause more CO2 to be released when they're together? Does it cause less, or is there no effect, which is called neutral priming? And what effect is abiotic or biotic factors? So we know, especially what's predicted based on climate change, is increased fire frequency, which then will lead to increase in black carbon deposition. So increased fire activity should produce more black carbon because black carbon is a product of fire. So to evaluate this, I took the same amount of sand in each jar and put approximately 2% carbon in all of the jars. But I mixed them between sitting directly on top of the soil, being incorporated or mixed into the soil. The same thing you'll get either directly post-burn or through time in any ecosystem. So my experimental design was a two-way factorial design. It looked at carbon type and placement. And I looked at dynamic sampling as well as cumulative sampling over the entire, I believe, 694 days. So how did I do this? Each jar received 98 grams of sand. And then I put in, since BC is majority carbon, fine black carbon, I put in about 2 grams in the fine treatment. And then I mixed the fine with coarse and then with pine litters. And then I essentially crossed fine BC, coarse BC, pine litter, dissolved sugar, which I use as a positive control, and inoculum by itself, which I use as a negative control, which is just the soil microorganisms, into these jars, mixed them all up and measured them with ergo, which is infrared gas analyzer, to see how much CO2 is being respired. So what I found is when I look at the CO2 efflux from the ergo, there was a significant difference in carbon types, whether it was pine litter or fine BC or coarse BC in the combination of mixtures of them. But placement, whether the carbon was on top or mixed into the soil, was not statistically significant. But when I looked at the carbon remaining in the jar, so at the end of the experiment, I broke down the jars, put them in the ball mill, grinded up the materials, and then combusted them in elastic gas. Placement did have an impact on what was remaining, even though I couldn't find an impact on the CO2 that was getting released in terms of placement. But that's because I think of this next graph I'm going to show, where here originally, so these are days here, and this is the average of the CO2 being released across the experiment. And what you see is there's a lot of variation at the beginning. So you see a pulse of CO2 being released. And that's because it's fresh material. The microorganisms just getting on it. They're going to be cranking out as much as they can. But eventually, there's some dynamics, but it plateaus and even out through time. So most studies look at somewhere in this range, which is why a majority of the soil literature is confusing when we just talk about at least black carbon or fire effects on soils in general, because most people don't go past like 60, 70 days and all these dynamics are going on. But this study, I took all the way out to 694 days, and you can see that it eventually asymptotically plateaued or they became similar. And that's some of the confusion on what is the effects of fire on soil. So if you were to go back in 7 days and look at this, this would show that burning is extremely dangerous and bad for fire, for the soil, because look how this CO2 is getting released. That means this system at some point will cease to exist. But if we come back 188 days, 300 days, or 600 days, you'll realize that those effects then plateau or are off. So here is the cumulative respiration, or what was remaining in the jars at the end, which I was talking about. And what's important here in this graph, what I'm trying to show you is that if you look at L, which is just pine litter by itself, so this is pine litter, soil microorganisms, and sand, you see it respired the most of all treatments. When you mix in any forms of black carbon, which is produced when you burn, whether it's fine, coarse, the combination of them, or fine and coarse put together, you see a reduction in respiration. So what that means is there's a negative priming effect. So black carbon inhibits the respiration of more labile materials. This is important because if we say fire, when we originally burn, release CO2 in the atmosphere, and it does initially, that's a small pulse in that, like that day. The day you burn, the next 2-3 days you're burning. But I told you this black carbon material lasts for thousands of years. And we know this black carbon inhibits the respiration of the pine litter or the more labile materials. So if it's inhibiting it, it should cause long-term storage of carbon below ground. So if we only look at like the PM 2.5 sensors or what's above ground, we get in half the picture. So in summary, what from this experiment, I found that carbon type did have a significant effect on soil respiration over 694 days. Carbon decomposition rates varied in the first 355 days, but at the end of the experiment, it was not statistically significant. That was that plateau I was showing. There was no effect of placement on decomposition rates, but was statistically significant based on carbon remaining in the jars. And future work that needs to be done is I want to change the temperatures of the black carbon used, because all of the black carbon used in the experiment was formed at the same exact temperature, 350 degrees Celsius. I want to use different types of material because all of this came from pine, longleaf pine twigs. And then I want to use some stable isotopes to determine if those changes in respiration came from the pine litter itself or the BC, because that's something I couldn't figure out in this experiment. I can figure out total respiration, but I couldn't partition out where was it coming from. And I will end with that if there are any questions.
Thanks so much, Dexter. I actually have a question. When it comes to black carbon production and the contribution of it to, our atmosphere and climate change, how big are wildfires and prescribed fires in that contribution?
So right now, they're accounting for approximately about 20%. But what's the main driver is, of course, fossil fuels. But because fossil fuels is a non-renewable resource, the focus or the shift is now going towards burning wildfires and prescribed fires, because once fossil fuels run out, then the only thing that will be left is the biomass. So originally it was thought to be the second biggest contributor. So black carbon was behind CO2, and now they're bumping it down, but it's a great area because, again, it's statistics, it's research, between methane and black carbon for being the second biggest contributor.
Thanks, that's fascinating.
So Dexter, I got a question for you too. This is really interesting stuff, and I don't understand enough about it. I'm still trying to process everything that you just went over here too. But have you gained enough understanding here that there's actually changes in the practices that fire practitioners are using that we should start to think about to kind of reduce this release, or are we still just scratching the surface on understanding how that works?
So there is certain things that we know already. So we know that burning like grasslands is better than burning wet, like bogs and more heavily wetter material, because essentially if you get the fire out fast, so high intensity, quick fires produce less soot and smoke than slow smoldering, rolling, like what y'all will see in like on the mountainside with wet, slow moving fire. So we know that for a fact. What we don't understand yet is that bad? So although it's smoking and we know we have the potential of either respiration problems for people or like car accidents, is that smoke short-term outweighing some of these potential benefits like storing carbon long-term or new plant growth? Because black carbon, when it's formed, it's very porous, so it holds nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, everything in the soil, which allows more plants to grow on an ecosystem or on a, we could say, an area of land than if you didn't burn. So you might be hindering yourself long-term by saying, I'm not gonna burn because I don't want to produce smoke, but missing out on these other benefits like new plant growth, cleaner air because of more plants being able to be sustained on the same amount of land versus when you don't burn. So it's a mixed pot. We ain't finished yet, but yeah, we're scratching the surface trying to figure out what is, so that's what part of my decision I'm trying to do. Like even the reason I looked at fuel moisture, I wanted to kind of come at the whole, what's our prescription window? How many days since rain does that matter? So I want to expand our burn abilities, but I need to have some research behind it to say that this is why we're doing that.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you're looking at that.
Thanks so much, Dexter. I think I'm scanning the chat real quick. I think that was all the questions we had, but like Josh said, I'm sure this is all pretty new stuff to most of us here. And thank you for sharing that with us.
Oh, no problem. I appreciate the opportunity to come on.
With that, we're pretty close to lunch. There's a couple of things. I believe Brent Harrell had an update and he wasn't here for the agency updates in the beginning. So if you're here now, Brent, you can go ahead and turn on your mic and go ahead and give your update. It doesn't sound like he's here. Well then, Josh, if you want to go ahead and talk about some of the polls, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah, so we asked how long you've been involved in prescribed fire, and it's interesting to see that we're pretty spread out there. 35% were 10 years or more. I'm guessing y'all can see these results now. We got a lot of people, about a quarter of the people here got 5 to 10 years, a quarter 2 to 5 years, and then we've even got some that are less than 2 years. How long have you been involved with the Fire Council? The majority here is 2 to 5 years. I will say that we found out after launching the poll that anyone that was presenting or a co-host or on the board was not able to take the poll. So there's definitely a few more people on the board that have been involved for more than for the 10 years. So most people are hearing about the Fire Council through their employer, which makes sense. But that's also something that we kind of want to change to get the public to learn more about us. Did you participate in prescribed fire in 2021? Looks like the vast majority of people did. And it also looked like everyone seemed to think that attending the virtual meeting was a lot easier. And we've got some follow-up questions that'll come after lunch to see how the membership thinks that we should proceed with our future meetings, whether it's a combination, we go back to a full in-person meeting. So with that, we'll stop and we'll have some more polls after lunch to look at some other aspects of the membership.
I see that Brent's on now, if that was all you had for the polls, Josh.
Yeah.
Hey, Brent, you can unmute yourself and give us your agency update.
Okay, yeah, we got in 2020 we didn't get anything burned on for the most. There wasn't any burns in 2020, but we did get about probably close to getting up close to probably between 80 and 100 acres on a couple of barrens. There were significant. One was a fuel reduction burn. One was one to knock back some woody succession. So we got, but we did get some burning done. Division of Forestry and us this year, and that was probably, I think that was about it. So.
Thanks so much. Glad you're able to join.
Yeah, I've been on. I just had to step out for just a second, but yeah, I was actually taking a pack test today. So, and all right, thank you.
Thanks, Brent. With that, we are going to start lunch. We will come back at 1 o'clock. And I just wanted to remind everyone that the lobby is open and you are welcome to turn on your camera and talk if you would like, but I will see everyone back here at 1. Yes.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for inviting me here today. I'm very excited to be in a virtual room with a lot of Kentucky fire management professionals and share what I know about fire ecology. Here we go. So first, I'm going to give you a quick crash course in Everglades National Park itself and our fire and aviation program as a whole. And for those who are not familiar, Everglades National Park is located at the very southern tip of Florida. You can't go any farther south unless you are heading to the Florida Keys. The park consists of 1.5 million acres, and that incorporates portions of Florida Bay, but the above ground terrestrial portion is more than 650,000 acres. And of that, more than 560,000 acres are fire adapted ecosystems. We have a very busy and robust fire management program with the annual goal of burning between 100 and 150,000 acres per year. The Everglades is subject to a number of disturbance factors. Some rare ones for us are frost and freeze events. They do happen, but it's more like a once in a decade or so situation, and it can lead to some significant impacts to the ecosystems when it does happen. A little more frequent are tropical storms and hurricanes and floods. And then we have our typical drought, and of course, fire is one of our major disturbance factors. The interplay of fire and hydrology are the main drivers in vegetation community types and succession. Our prescribed fire season is water level and weather dependent. So if we meet the prescription parameters, there is potential to be able to burn at any time of the year, but predominantly early and late wet season, which is June and October, are our best chances to achieve those burn windows. Our wildfire severity conditions, so our fire season typically runs around March through May, that end of the dry season time of year. We have a number of plant communities within the terrestrial Everglades ecosystem, tropical hardwood hammocks, pine rocklands, various prairies and marshes. But 4 of these are fire adapted, some are even fire dependent, and that's our pine rockland forests and 3 of our prairies, short hydro period, muley wet prairies. And those are usually subject to standing water about 6 to 8 months out of the year. And then our long hydro period prairies dominated by sawgrass species can be under standing water for 8 to 10 months out of the year. And then finally, we have our coastal prairies, which are along the west coast of the park, bordered by mangroves. Our fire and aviation program consists of the fire suppression. We have currently 2 engine modules permanently. Prescribed fire and planning, consisting of a fuels module. Aviation with a park helicopter and fixed wing aircraft, as well as some exclusive use contracts with local private aircraft. And then finally, what I'll be mostly focusing on is our fire ecology program, which consists of ideally a 4-person crew each year. Fire effects monitoring in the National Park Service is guided by what we call the Fire Monitoring Handbook, or for short, we'll just call it FMH a lot of times. This is a national standardized guide that provides the protocols for National Park Service units across the nation. A number of the fire adapted parks will have a fire effects monitoring program. We're not the only ones. And in this guide, we'll find instructions for plot design and installation, how to determine sample size. There's guidance on the various sampling methods that we can use depending on what our monitoring objectives can be, and with detailed descriptions as well as data sheet samples that we can use. It also in the back has various types of data analysis and guidance on how to use that. And this is a very robust, it's very thick, big guide, and it's available online. So if anyone was interested in developing some fire effects protocols, maybe installing some plots, and we're curious about what sort of guidance is out there, this is a really useful tool for anybody, not just the National Park Service. And you can find it just by Googling Fire Monitoring Handbook, NPS, and it'll be the first PDF that pops up. We also have an associated database software. It's a acronym heavy, but basically it has been designed with the Department of the Interior and U.S. Forest Service agencies in mind. And it is based off of the monitoring protocols and methods that are used in the Fire Monitoring Handbook. And it is a tool for us to store and conduct some analysis with our data. So, Everglades National Park specific fire effects monitoring, we have installed about 89 of these FMH plots throughout the park. And of those 89, they've been divided up into our 4 fire adapted communities. So we have here in the blue, the coastal prairies. The purple are our long hydroperiod prairies. Orange are the short hydroperiod prairies. And then the green triangles are our pine rockland forest plots. Now, fortunately, we don't have to visit all 89 every single year. They're monitored on a rotating basis, depending on what status they are when they most recently burned. So each plot had a pre-burn monitoring session, and that is just basically the installation is considered the pre-burn. Because these areas are fire adapted, that we don't really have any unburned control that we can use. So we go based on if it's been at least 3 years since it was burned, then we install and call it a pre-burn. And then the rotation after that is we'll visit and monitor immediate posts, 1 year, 2 year, and 5 years, and then 5-year increments after that, or until it next burns, which for most of these should not be more than 10, 15 year stops, ideally. We also, in addition to the fire monitoring handbook style plots, we have some Everglades specific ones that we developed. One is some endangered species butterfly monitoring that we conduct year round. And then we'll also develop as needed some short-term pilot projects that are usually based on needs or requests from our fire managers or resource managers. If they have a specific question about how fire is impacting a certain ecosystem or species of interest, then we will develop some short-term projects to take a look and get some baseline ideas of how those things are going. So looking at our 4 fire adapted ecosystems, the 2 prairies, the short and long-term hydroperiod prairies, we have the objectives to tuck kill greater than 50% of encroaching woody species immediately post-burn, as well as reduce fine fuels more than 70% immediate post-burn, and to track how those objectives are working. We have installed 30-meter transects for the plots in these ecosystems. These are the FMH plots. And in these plots, we do photo monitoring and post-burn severity assessments. In our coastal prairies, while they are also a grassland plot, they're slightly different. One of the main differences is they are much more difficult to move about in a lot of the time. And we also have a bit different in our monitoring objectives. Out in the coastal prairies, they are subject to the impacts of an invasive species called the Old World climbing fern, Lygodium microphyllum. And this it's a fern, but in vine form. And it's very similar to kudzu in that it'll drape across native plants, cut out the sunlight and choke them out and result in mortality of native vegetation in the area. So our objectives are to reduce the cover of Old World climbing fern, as well as reduce general fine fuel reduction objectives. So again, we have 30-meter transects for our FMH plots, in which we conduct photo monitoring, line and ocular estimates to determine cover of Old World climbing fern, and of course, our post-burn severity assessments. The ocular estimates are a 15-meter radius that we just kind of walk around and get a visual estimate of the cover of Lygodium from the plot center. And finally, we have our pine rockland forest. This area consists of approximately 20,000 of Everglades National Park's acres. So while it is a small amount out of the 1.5 million acres, it is kind of takes up a lot of our focus. It's a globally imperiled ecosystem, one of the last remaining tracts of this ecosystem in the United States is in Everglades National Park. The pine rocklands is characterized by having a higher elevation than most of the Everglades ecosystem. The elevation of the pines is between 3 to 12 feet. So we get nosebleeds sometimes when we go to the highest peaks of the pine rocklands. But this made it a very desirable area of South Florida for development. What we now know as Miami-Dade County is what was previously the most robust portion of pine rockland habitat. Today, Everglades has the largest intact fragments. The remainder is there's a little bit in the Florida Keys and then very small units scattered throughout Miami-Dade County. And this is labeled as a globally imperiled ecosystem according to the Florida Natural Areas Inventory. Some other characteristics of the pine rocklands is a single species overstory of South Florida /pine, a sparse palm and hardwood subcanopy, and a rich herbaceous and diverse understory. The open canopy and sparse subcanopy allows a lot of sunlight to penetrate, and that understory is very shade intolerant. And this is why this ecosystem we consider it fire dependent. Without fire, that hardwood shrub layer, the subcanopy layer, would continue to grow and become more dense and start to shade out that understory, and we lose that diversity. And within 20 years, we can start seeing a conversion from this open pine ecosystem to a more closed canopy, what we call a subtropical hardwood hammock. It's little mini hardwood forests. And then the final distinguishing characteristic is this limestone substrate. So underneath all this grass is limestone and virtually no soil. So another aspect of that conversion to the hardwood hammock is a development of a soil layer. So you just get a completely different ecosystem when fire is withheld from the pine rocklands. So our objectives for this ecosystem is to maintain a fire return interval of 3 to 7 years, reduce shrub density by 50% post-burn, reduce average shrub height by 25% within, as measured 2 years post-fire, and maintain the average species richness to within 90% of the baseline that was collected at installation, plot installation. So to track these objectives, we have established a little bit more detailed plots. They're 20 by 50 meter grids. Each of these little dots is a rebar where we have permanently installed these plots. We collect data along these center points. Here is where we do our photo monitoring with the camera pointed inwards towards plot center. Within each of these 4 quarters, we have tagged all pine trees that are 2.5 centimeters or greater, and we track them for growth and survival. We also do pine seedling counts to get an idea of new recruitment, and we do that within Q1 only. And then we also collect data along this 30-meter transect for plot species. We'll look at brush density, we'll do point intersect transects, and observe species belts to keep track of the hardwood species as well as species richness as a whole. And of course, as always, post-burn severity assessments. So to give you an idea of how we utilize the data, I'm going to share with you some of our results from our 2020 monitoring annual report. So our objective to reduce average shrub height by 25% as measured 2 years post-fire. We analyzed the plots that were in a 2-year status as the last time that they were monitored and saw an average shrub height reduction across those plots was 29%. So we were able to achieve that objective in 2020. And then looking at our species richness objective, where we wanted to maintain at least 90% of the baseline species richness, looking at the plots that were monitored for that objective in 2020, the average shows that in 2020, species richness was slightly above that of the baseline, so we were still able to maintain that objective. I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about our photo monitoring. This is a tool that is really very simple, very quick, it's impactful, and it's most accessible to fire managers of all types. I know that a robust fire ecology program is not something that every fire manager has access to. So you can't always have someone who's 20, daily job is to constantly track how the ecosystem is reacting to the fires that are impacting it. And so being able to just go out, maybe set up a few permanent photo points and have 1 or 2 people spend a day or two snapping photos is a much more accessible fire effects monitoring tool. So to achieve our photo monitoring, here are some of the tools that we use. Of course, we have a camera. And these days, everybody's cell phone has pretty well, almost professional grade cameras on them. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the way we do it, but we use a digital Canon EOS with a wide angle lens. We also attach that to a monopod with a bubble level. And this will keep the camera at a standard height and level every time a picture is taken, no matter who the photographer. We also include within the picture a range pole. So we have 2 or 3 meter pole that we can use, and it is divided into these color-coded 50 centimeter increments. And ours fit over the plot rebar, but you can get some where you can just stick them in the ground so that you don't have to have a second person holding it. And then this will just give you a very good, quick visual estimate of the height of surrounding vegetation. And then finally, a photo ID board that we can include within the picture so that we can know the plot name, the photo point, the burn status, and date the picture was taken just by looking at the picture without having to refer to a separate photo log. So this gives you an idea of why that monopod and bubble level are pretty useful. In the early days, we would just have someone stand, the standard was to have someone stand a few feet back from our permanent rebar and take a picture towards plot center. Now this would give us really varying angles of the picture depending on how tall the person was or how they estimated a couple feet. So once we instituted standards to place a monopod at the base of a rebar, so it would be set in the exact same location each time, and it would be set at the same height and at a perfectly level area pointing towards our range pole. We now have this constant frame. Every time we take a new picture, no matter how tall the photographer is, this is the frame and only the vegetation should be changing. Some lessons learned over the years, we've been doing this a while. One is, to the best of your abilities, keep people out of your photos. It naturally tends to draw your audience's eye towards the person and they start thinking about what they're up to. They look sad, standing in the water, they're having a nice day on a bike ride, and now they're no longer focusing on your vegetation changes that would be the point that you were trying to make. So now with our set standards, we have a very level picture. Our person holding the photo board should never be showing more than a wrist. And any workers who are out here should be ducking behind vegetation, which they often are. And there's really a lot of uses for these pictures. If you're collecting data, then it can be a good visual accompaniment to it. It's all well and good to have a nice little graph showing the burn severity per plot. So we have a rating system for our burns that we numerically give them. It could go from not burned, scorched, lightly burned, to moderately burned, to heavily burned. And so everybody has a clear understanding that in prairie plots 11 and 17, the vegetation and substrate were approximately lightly burned. But when you can include pictures of those exact plots as well on the day that they burned, then it really enhances the understanding of what exactly your lightly burned rating means. Another useful way to use these pictures is you can still collect some data, even if you're not out there going along a transect, labeling trees, counting things, spending hours in a plot. If all you can do is go out and take a snapshot with a range pull in it, you're still able to get an idea in the change over the ecosystem. For instance, in 1 year post-fire, using our range pull, we see that the shrub height is greater than 1 meter tall. And then 2 years post-fire, we revisit and see now that same shrub is over 1.5 meters tall. So we can look at these pictures and say from year 1 to year 2, shrubs have increased, they become more dense. But with this range pull and a photo, we can have a little bit more of a quantifiable backup to what we're saying. And then finally, just having a long-term photo series can be a really powerful tool when you're discussing, especially things like in our pine rockland forest, where habitat conversion is pretty quick, relatively speaking, to other ecosystems in, say, the Western United States, where it's 100+ years for habitat conversion to occur. When we have 15, 20 years of photos, we can really demonstrate what we mean when we say that. So I'm going to take you through one of our plot photo series, starting in 2001, where you can see we hadn't quite worked out people in pictures or having a standardized place for the camera. But here we are in 2001. In 2002, the same photo area, and the forest here is in a 2-year post-burn status. And you can see just a little bit different angle. They're a bit farther back from that rebar than the previous person. Now we're in 2005 with a post-burn picture, and we have our standardized photo monitoring in place now. Range pull in place, the rebar will be at the bottom, just a little bit of a photo board holder in the picture. And you can see now that limestone substrate that I was mentioning before, really no soil to speak of. It's pretty remarkable how many plants sustain themselves in this, what looks to us a barren ecosystem. Now we have 2006, 1 year post-fire. So you can see how quickly vegetation begins to rebound. Grasses are coming up, but our limestone substrate is still pretty visible. 2 years post-fire in 2007. 5-year post in 2010. And 10-year post. And now you're really starting to get an idea of how quickly and densely the hardwood species can start to encroach. And we got a burn in 2017. 2018, we're back to 1 year post and 2 years post. And we'll be revisiting this plot again next year to get our 5-year picture. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the specialized monitoring that we do. One of our big projects is to keep track of a federally endangered species of butterfly. We have 2 in the park, and conveniently they are both specialists on a single species of host plant called the pine rockland. So it makes monitoring for them very simple. The 2 butterflies are the Florida leafwing, this one right here, and the Bartram scrub hairstreak. I'll mostly be focusing on the Florida leafwing, as that one has now, it's only known to occur in the pine rocklands of Everglades National Park. It was last observed in the pine rocklands of the Florida Keys in 2006, but it hasn't been seen since. And the Bartram's hairstreak can still be found in some of the fragments outside of the park. So both of them reside in the pine rocklands on the pineland croton plants. It's their host plant for their larval stages. Each of the butterflies has a 60-day life cycle from egg to adult. They're multivoltine, meaning they can there's many generations per year. And because they're endangered species, there are mitigations in place in our fire management plan to ensure that there is not excessive take of these during our activities. Some of those mitigations are to complete croton surveys 2 weeks before doing pre-burn treatments, so like mowing or expanding fire breaks. So we'll survey the pineland croton plants looking for any living larvae on them, and then ensure to avoid those plants during our fuel reduction treatments along fire breaks. And then we also have it in our plan to not burn adjacent pine blocks within a 12-month period, so that we can maintain an unburned refugia for the butterflies and all wildlife. And then finally to create a mosaic burn pattern of 25 to 50% unburned areas within a burn unit immediately post-burn. And so we instituted our butterfly monitoring project just to see not only monitor the presence and distribution and activity of these butterflies, but also to observe any post-fire impacts to them. We began doing this in 2016. We have 12 sites across the pine rockland ecosystem in which we observe 200 of the croton plants per site, looking for the larvae themselves, as well as signs that they have been feeding. So the Bartram's hair streak looks like this little kind of fuzzy slug-like caterpillar, and their feeding pattern is to scrape the plant matter off the top of the leaf and leaving behind a skeletonized leaf. And the Florida leafwing, there's this little tiny guy right there. I don't know if you can quite pick him out. But when they're freshly hatched, they will eat the tip of a leaf and then lay a chain of a mixture of frass and webbing. And they'll hang out at the bottom so that they blend in and just look like a piece of dead leaf. As they get older, they'll go through and consume the entire leaf material off a plant. But this initial leaf will always be left behind. And so it's a really easy way, even if we don't find larvae, we'll see these signs of herbivory and know that the species has been present. We monitor twice per quarter, and when staffing and scheduling allow, we'll get out once a month. But if we get out once every 2 months, then we're still within that 60-day life cycle and have a chance of encountering the larvae if they were present. Here's a map of our monitoring area. So the numbers are our sites that we visit. The letters are just a label of our pine blocks. So when I mentioned earlier that we don't burn adjacent blocks within a 12-month period, that's what I'm referring to. So if we burn block G, we won't burn E or F or any of the connecting ones within a 12-month period. These little dots are from a previous project we did where we were mapping pineland croton to get an understanding of where it's located and where we might encounter the butterflies the most. So I'm going to take you through some of our results that we've found over the years. So this is looking at the activity of the Florida leafwing. Looking at the numbers here represent how many larvae were observed for every 100 croton that was searched. So we're not getting, even our highest number, we're hitting almost 3 Florida leafwing. But if you look, we've got 2016 and 2017 in this first box. And we, in those years, we noticed a distinct peak of activity in the beginning part of the year and then midsummer, and the slight, rise at the end of the year. In 2018, we still were getting that early year peak, but by that point, we had lost our summer activity peak. And for whatever reason, for the remaining years up until 2020, we did not see the return of a peak of activity during that summer season. And things decreased further in 2019 and 2020 when that early year peak did not occur either. The one consistency that remained was the late season, so November, December, kind of 1 per 100 croton. That's been consistent across the years, except for 2020 when we had a very low activity year. looking at just 2019, these are the absolute totals of the Florida leafwing larvae that we observed. So this is just total counts. It doesn't account for the number of croton that we observed. And the reason I'm showing you this is, we were noticing an interesting pattern of distribution for this species. If we look at our pine blocks going from west to east, so west to east, we started to notice a bit of a concentration in the western pines, especially during the time of year with low numbers. And then once activity peaked in that summertime peak, which we still received in 2019, or a mild one, that's when we began to see the distribution move through to the west. In 2020, when we had an exceptional low count that year, we didn't really see that expansion to the eastern pines, but we did see this kind of holdout in the western pines, where they're hanging on even in low numbers. They were demonstrating this preference for the western pineland habitat. When we kind of broke this down graphically, it shows similar thing. This is looking across all years now. This is the average monthly larvae counts per block, looking from west to east. And we can see this pattern holds, much higher numbers in the western pines and decreasing as you go east. So much so that from year to year, when you're seeing differences in abundance of the Florida leafwing, the majority of that difference is occurring in the western pines, with the exception of 2017. By the time you hit the eastern pines, the numbers are very similar. So some thoughts that we have in conclusion about our Florida leafwing and their current status is that over the years, this wasn't included in the results I showed you, but some things that we have observed over the years is that larvae will return to unburned or respreaded croton within a burn unit within 2 to 8 months post-fire. So they do quickly recolonize an area when they are in that area. They demonstrate a preference for the western pine rockland habitats. There's been a loss of those early and mid-season peaks over time. And late season activity has remained pretty consistent across the years, with the exception of 2020. And overall, the frequency of the observations have decreased in 2019 and 2020 compared to previous years. So a lot of questions remain, and a lot is unknown about these endangered insects. Specifically, what are the drivers of this habitat preference and the spatial distribution, and what accounts for these changes of periods of peak activity? All we really have is a snapshot of what the larvae themselves are doing, and we know pretty much nothing about their associated predators, parasites, parasitoids, and bacteria and fungi. We don't know what the populations of those organisms is doing in conjunction, or if there's changes in quality of the pineland croton that isn't visible to the naked eye. Host plant availability does not seem like it should be a driver. There is croton everywhere, but something is driving the behavior of these insects. And certainly there are researchers out there, and if anybody was interested, and a few people are, in learning more, that would be most welcome. So in conclusion about fire effects monitoring in Everglades National Park, I just kind of gave you a very crash course in how we utilize it. But overall, our monitoring data supports adaptive fire management. We collect data to ensure that our management objectives are being met. And then we can also provide information that may guide management decisions on timing, location, or ignition patterns for prescribed fires, depending on the status of the ecosystem and our goals in fire management. Additionally, that FMH data that I was discussing earlier is public information that is available upon request to researchers. We do get a lot of researchers coming into the park, and we'll get requests for this that may supplement the work that they're already doing, or may drive them to consider new questions or go more in depth on some of the things we've just kind of been observing trends for. So that concludes my discussion on fire effects monitoring. Thank you for inviting me today, and I will take any questions.
Thanks, Aerin, for that wonderful presentation. We do have a question in the chat. Is the croton a fairly common plant across the pine rocklands? The map had it occurring in a very linear distribution. Is that due to surveying methods?
Yes, that is in fact due to surveying methods. This was a project that we did in conjunction with the park botanist, and it was kind of a when we could get out there project. So yeah, as you can see, it's a linear distribution, and these block breaks are actually fire break trails. So pretty much we were walking long trails and mapping what we'd see, with the occasional of going interior. So I don't have it with me, but I do have another map that has a track log of all the areas that we looked. So you can get an idea of where we looked, where it wasn't, but then you also get a much larger idea of where we didn't look. So it is a fairly common plant. It's not, you know, ubiquitous across the entire landscape. It'll be patchy here and there, but it's definitely a common pine rockland plant.
Awesome, thanks. I don't see any further questions in the chat. But if you want, you can provide a contact in the chat if anyone wants to reach out, if they have any other questions following this presentation. Thank you so much, Aerin.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
Hey, Maddie, this is Cody Roden. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Cody.
Okay, yeah, so I have a quick question if we have time.
Go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Aerin, for this presentation. It was really interesting. I was just wondering, in the pine rocklands, the herbaceous layer, is that revegetated mostly by like root sprouting or seeds? Just those pictures were really interesting. It kind of blew my mind how much it came back in 1 year in that really shallow soil.
Yes, I know. It is pretty remarkable. So, yep, that's correct. The majority of it is resprouting from the root base. Our fires down here, because it's predominantly fine fuel that carries fire, they're pretty fast moving, and you don't get that residency time to heat below the surface. So, yeah, the root system survives for the most part these fires just fine, and then quickly resprouts and just keeps on going. Nothing really keeps the pine rocklands down, except no fire.
That's really interesting. And so, if I might ask a follow-up question, the croton, is that an annual plant, or does it resprout from the rootstock?
Yep, the croton also is a resprouting plant. It's a very persistent plant. We do get an influx of seedlings periodically, but when we go in, we've done some analysis where we've had tagged croton plants and followed them over the years after fire. And most of them will resprout pretty well. The one exception is if we happen to have a flooding that occurs shortly after a fire, and then the water covers them before they're able to grow tall enough, that's when we might see some mortality. But for the most part, the root system survives and they're resprouting. Within a month, we see resprouts of these plants. And within 2 months, 2 months, we'll find the larvae on unburned plants in small unburned fragments, but within 4 months we can find larvae on these resprouting plants as well.
That's really interesting. Do you notice any preference by the larvae to resprouted plants? So like maybe more fresh vegetation as opposed to a plant that's been existing on the landscape for years and years in a row?
Yes, we do. Yeah, when they have the option, we've had a couple of plots where it just happened to work out that a portion of the plot with croton didn't burn and another portion of it did. And we did see once the resprouts got to, it's a height, seems to be a height preference for the Florida leafwing, not so much the Bartram's airstreak. And once the resprouts reach that desired height, then they'll kind of ignore the unburned and move over to the resprouts.
Thank you.
Welcome, thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Aerin. Before we go ahead and move forward with the committee updates, Josh is going to talk about some of the results of our second poll.
All right, thanks, Maddie. Again, we'll reshare the last question here in the poll that we got for the last segment here during our updates, but you can see by and large, most of people in attendance today consider themselves practitioners, actually applying fire on the landscape. Most of us are associated with state agencies. We've got a few nonprofit, one individual or landowners there. We'd really like to see those numbers go up in the future. You know, about 2/3 of us are participating in wildfire suppression as part of our normal job duties as well. And then we asked about upcoming trainings. I know Cody's going to kind of touch on some of this here in a minute, but it does look like we've got several people here that would benefit from some additional trainings coming up later this year. So I'll send another poll out here as well as this last question just to get everybody's take on that here while we're doing the committee updates.
Awesome, thanks, Josh. So I'm going to introduce the committees. We have 4 committees in the Fire Council. I'll just go ahead and plug in that if you're looking for a way to get more involved, joining a committee is a great way to do that. We currently have the Training Committee, the Outreach and Education Committee, the Partnership Committee, and the Air Quality Committee, but we've already heard from them today. So we're going to go ahead and get started with Cody Roden on his updates with the Training Committee.
Thanks, Maddie. And so I'm going to type my contact information really quickly in the chat, and please, or I think that's what Maddie just said too, but please get a hold of me if you guys are interested in the Training Committee, or if you have any follow-up questions for kind of some of the stuff I'm going to touch on in this short committee update. So let me try sharing my screen here. So can everybody see that PowerPoint?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And so here we have some data from the Kentucky Prescribed Fire Council Certified Burn Boss training, which was touched on earlier in kind of the agency updates. And so I have a couple of asterisks in here. These data don't include individuals that were trained over the last few years and have since left the agency that they were trained when they were there. So if somebody worked for KDFWR 2 years ago, they were trained and then they left, they're still counted in here. You know, their Kentucky Prescribed Fire Burn Boss training is still valid, right? So this stuff isn't through a particular agency, it's to the individual. And so as of right now, we have 89 qualified certified burn bosses. We have 55 associate burn bosses. So the difference between that 89 and 55 is we had a slew of people grandfathered in to certified burn bosses. And then there's also RXB2 and stuff like that, where people can be qualified as a Kentucky certified burn boss with those federal standards. And so we trained 55 people through the Fire Council, of which 42% have achieved full certified burn boss in Kentucky. And then here I just listed the individuals that achieved their full certified burn boss in 2021. So congratulations to those individuals, and thanks for seeing that through. And so here we kind of just have, again, those 89 certified burn bosses broken down by agency. And then this is organized by the highest number of people and then going down. So KDFWR, again, is kind of half the pie here. And then we have Daniel Boone, National Park Service, and KDF kind of filling in the other 3/4 of the pie chart. But then we have a lot of other individuals in here certified as burn bosses in the state as well. And so in 2021, we had a kind of a hybrid certified burn boss training. And so a portion of it was online, all the presentations, the coursework was all online. And then we had one in-person field meeting, and that was done in Frankfurt. And we were only able to get 4 students through for this first class in 2021. And so that was largely due to COVID restrictions on agency travel. The Energy and Environment Cabinet and a bunch of agencies under them were not able to travel. And so we had a lot more people signed up, but unfortunately they weren't able to make it because of their agency travel restrictions. And so the thing I'm looking for some feedback on, and again, throw this in the chat or shoot me an email or call me, we kind of had a plan to do a second class in 2021. And I think someone from KDF mentioned earlier on that, maybe the Energy and Environment Cabinet might open up traveling. So please keep me posted on that. And as soon as you all get travel opened up, we can go ahead and run with that second certified burn boss or apprentice burn boss training later in this year, maybe later this summer, where we have, again, another hybrid class with a field portion, potentially in multiple places in the state. And so a couple other activities that we got going on in the training committee is the 8-hour course. So this is the course that is kind of geared towards individuals, maybe private landowners or people along those lines that want to be a crew member on burns or kind of figure out how to burn themselves. So this is kind of that first step. And this course will allow, by Kentucky Prescribed Fire Council standards, allow individuals to be crew members on burns as well. And so I need instructors for this course. So again, this is a day-long course. Some of the topics we cover in prescribed fires, terminology, fire behavior, implementation, and controlled burn planning. And so please contact me if you're interested in being an instructor for any part of this course. You don't have to be an expert in any of this stuff. You do have to have some experience, obviously, but please let me know and we'll get you going on that. And we're kind of thinking that we might do a hybrid version of this too, of this 8-hour course. So again, have some virtual content and then have maybe a field day where we show people, this is what a fire break looks like, or this is what a raked line looks like, and show them some of the tools of the trade and things like that. And so again, we're kind of trying to hammer that stuff out, but please contact me if you're interested or available to be an instructor for any part of this course. And then I think I saw a survey pop up. If you guys could take that, that would be great too for some more information on where we're going with the training committee. And so that was it for my brief update. So I can take any questions now, or please, shoot me an email or drop me a line and let me know if anyone's interested in being able to instruct the 8-hour course. And those of you that are in the Environment and Energy Cabinet, if you could give me a heads up on your travel capabilities moving forward in this year.
Thanks so much, Cody. I don't see any questions, but I did link all the committee chair and contact information in the chat as well. Next up is the Outreach and Education Committee, which I am the chair of, so give me a minute. Got a lot of things open right now. Here we go. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I don't have a whole lot to report on. I just wanted to remind everyone of our website, kyfire.org. You can find information about each committee, the trainings and courses that we have coming up. Our fire portal link is also located on our website. And a bunch of other really great resources. So just wanted to plug that in here. This year for the committee, when it comes to outreach and education type stuff, Trey Prather is working with Berea College and their production team right now on some type of educational public video on Berea's use of prescribed fire as a management tool. We were originally working with them on trying to get more of a fire council production type video, but in order for them to meet their interests and their goals, they would have to focus on Berea's use of fire, which is great. And the Fire Council will probably get a mention in that. I also recently conducted a presentation that was filmed with Kentucky State University's production team for their Earth Week. I will be getting a link to that video soon, but it's a very basic introduction to fire, prescribed fire versus wildland fire type introductory level presentation. And we also mentioned the Fire Council in there as well. We had a committee meeting. We discussed program development, future program development that will bridge the gap between fire education and field experience opportunities, and what that might look like with liability issues, working with colleges that already kind of offer this education. And when we get the ball rolling on that, this is something obviously what we will work in partnership with the training committee. And lastly, we talked a lot about education material and sharing, some type of sharing agreement with that material and building up a library for that. We all kind of do our own outreach and education on prescribed fire in whatever capacity that we can, but it would be nice to pool resources on that as well for all members to use, kind of like how we do with prescribed fire in general. But that is all I had for my updates. And again, if you want to contact me or join the committee, you are welcome to do that by following the link on the chat. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Trey Prather when I forgot to when I mentioned the website, because he's an integral part of that running smoothly. So thanks, Trey.
Welcome.
I forgot after I was done talking that I'm still moderating. Next up, we have the partnership committee, and the chair for that is Chris Miner. So go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, hey everybody. So kind of the charge for the past little bit for the partnership committee has been to work on a statewide MOU that tries to be inclusive with every agency implementing prescribed fire in the state of Kentucky. We've made pretty significant progress on that. It was obviously when you're talking about trying to write an MOU at that scale, there's a lot of factors that come into play. So our strategy has been kind of a three-phase strategy. So now we do have a draft MOU in place, and that's being circulated amongst the state agencies, Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves, Kentucky Fish and Wildlife, and Kentucky Division of Forestry for now. And our hope is that they will get that signed relatively soon. I know it's being reviewed by legal staff right now. And then once they complete the initial signatures, the MOU is designed in a way that other entities can be added on as time goes on. And so I've already sent this out to some of the nonprofit NGOs that are out there just to get them to start reviewing it in preparation for signature soon. So that's kind of our second step. And then our third step or third phase is to have discussions with the federal partners and other folks that may be interested in signing on in the event, especially for our federal partners where other cooperating agreements aren't in place. There's other mechanisms out there that allow the cooperation that we'd like to see across the state, and this could be used to pick up any areas where that may be lacking, working with our federal partners. Another unique thing about this MOU is that it's got it has the core text, obviously, but it allows each agency to provide any additional requirements that would be needed for folks to participate on their burns. For example, if your agency requires arduous physical fitness pack test or full-fledged NWCD standards. You can simply write that into the addendum, which is part of your signature page. We realize that even as we spin this out to other partners, there's still going to have to be some legal review and maybe some back and forth. But our hope is that the core content of this MOU will be pretty persistent throughout all the partners that'll sign on. The agreement, once signed, is for a 5-year term. And then again, people can add on as needed. But I should also mention that it's got to be approved by all the cooperators that's on the plan at that given time. And private companies can also sign on, again, provided that they meet the requirements as specified by those that have already signed on to the MOU. And yeah, they have the training. So overall, what we're trying to shoot for here, minus some partners that might not be able to do this, but we developed this Kentucky Certified Burn Boss program and the training standards for prescribed fire crew members. And so our hope is that we can really start to see that play out by having this agreement in place. In other words, a TNC property where TNC is the jurisdictional party can all of a sudden, under this MOU, allow any Kentucky Certified Burn Boss to lead a burn on our property. So that's our hope in doing this, and everything's looking promising at this point. But we'll see how it rolls out. So just stay tuned. Once it's signed by the state folks, I'll be reaching out to the nonprofits again, and then also the federal folks, and seeing what we can come up with. That's all I've got.
Thanks, Chris. Chris's contact information is also in the link I provided if you're interested in being involved in that committee, or if you have any questions. We are pretty far ahead of schedule, but Josh, go ahead and do your survey stuff.
Okay, that means I get extra time to talk here at the end, right?
Yeah, I guess a whole 30 minutes extra.
No, I won't take that. I'm sure everybody will be fine finishing up a little bit early. So I'll go ahead and go over the last polls that we did there. We re-asked this question here, and kind of interesting. It was curious to me. I didn't expect to have so much on the liability insurance for employer concerns, but that's good to know. Funding seemed to be another one, but for a quarter of the people, there didn't seem to be any barriers in place, so that was good to see. Stop that and share this other one. So looked like the vast majority of people were interested in us doing some type of hybrid meeting next year, where we would have a day kind of like this, where we had virtual presentations, and then follow that up with some in the field site visits to some different sites. And so the board will definitely look at that and consider that when we're planning next year's annual meeting. Would you or your agency be willing to host one of the regional field days? Seemed like we had some interest in that. And so that's good to see. The board will probably be reaching out to those people to organize that for the upcoming meeting. So vast majority of people were interested in helping with training in the state for prescribed fire, and a good number were willing to mentor less experienced prescribed fire bosses. So that's great to see. Hopefully you'll take the next step and get involved in the training committee, or more involved in the council here, because that's exactly what we're trying to do here, is increase the number of practitioners on the ground and the knowledge of those that are applying fire on the landscape. At least half of you are interested in getting more involved with the fire council, and those committees are exactly the way you can do that. They don't take up a whole lot of time until you become the chair, and they obviously take up a little bit more time, but even just having people sit in for a few meetings a year to offer opinions and how that affects them in the field would be beneficial. So and then you can see we had several interested in specific committees there, some that didn't want to be involved and some that were willing to help wherever they were needed. So that's great to see, and hopefully we see some of these people get involved and reach out to Maddie or Chris or Kesley or Cody and get involved in the committees there. It's a great way to network. It's a great way to stay connected with different agencies that are burning in the state and help further our shared vision of increasing prescribed fire in Kentucky. So, so I'll stop sharing that. Just to close us out, we got a few things that we'll go over here or update you on, maybe leave you with something to think about. But one thing I do want to mention, if you are a new agency contact, you know, as far as training for your organization or whatever, please reach out to me or Cody Roden and let us know so that we can get you on the email list as we start to develop more trainings and try to communicate better to facilitate those. We want to make sure we have your contact and we're getting that information to the right people. I thought we had a really good meeting today. It was, I thought it was really interesting. Some of the talks that we had, Dexter Strother definitely gave me things to think about that I don't really understand at this point. But it's encouraging to hear that, you know, they don't think that the long-term benefits, or they think that the long-term benefits far outweigh potential short-term effects when it comes to soils and carbon release. So that's positive, but there's definitely more to learn there. And it's something that we all need to kind of keep our ear to and pick up. I thought Aerin offered a great way for us to do some fire effects monitoring with the photo plots. It doesn't take a lot of time. It can really tell a story over years. So I encourage you to explore that and maybe pair that with some other monitoring that you've got going on just to help you know, further our education and knowledge and understanding of how fire affects the lands. Then I'll just remind everybody again about this voluntary smoke management plan. We're going to send that out here probably later this week. You know, this is something that the council expects to adopt and that the partner agencies will hopefully begin implementing if they're not already implementing these. So I encourage you to take a look at that and make sure that that's not going to handcuff you or prohibit you from doing your job or being able to apply fire in a way that you feel it needs to be for your particular circumstance. I want to encourage everybody again to get involved in the committees. We can really use the help. We do have an upcoming drone demonstration through a company that produces a drone that has an ignition system on it. And so we're going to have them come into the state and do a little demo for us. We sent out a email last week to all the program leads for the various partners. And if you're interested in that, you know, talk to whoever your fire program manager is. We have a limited number of spots there, but along with that, we do need all of those agency contacts that were emailed last week to please complete the survey so that we know how many spots we have available. I'm sure that we could fill that up, so we want to make sure that we do. And it depends on us knowing how many people you're planning on sending, if any, so that we can open up any extra spots to agencies that may have more than the allotted number that want to attend. So please do that. Again, the interagency prescribed fire MOU, I think is going to be a game changer. From the state agency standpoint, we've been operating as if this is in place, and it's really made a huge difference this year between KMP and KDFWR and Division of Forestry's cooperation. And I hope that that just expands and begins to include a lot of our nonprofit and federal and even private partners to increase our experience and ability to get fire on the ground in the state. So with all that, I don't think I have anything else to add. I appreciate everybody joining us today, and I hope to see you all in the field soon. Let's see what we got in the comments here. Yeah, well, I agree, Brent. Liability is a big limiting factor, something that we're working on. So with that, I guess we'll close out the meeting. Nobody else has anything? Maddie, you got anything before we go?
No, I would just say hang on so we can save the meeting recording.
Oh, okay.
Everyone else can go.
Great. All right, well, thanks everybody for being here, and we'll talk to you soon. If you want to get involved or have questions, feel free to reach out to myself or any of the board members or the committee chairs.
Thanks all.